Knowledge is another element that doesn't get mentioned enough, same as entrepreneurialism. Everybody just talks about the four you can see. Nobody's making a highlight reel out of somebody sitting with a book. But knowledge and consciousness built this culture just as much as any scratch, rhyme, or backspin. The reason it gets left out is the same as entrepreneurialism. It doesn't perform. A DJ set is an event. A b-boy in the center of a cipher is an event. An MC on the mic is an event. A young person discovering who they are, where they come from, and what they're worth happens quietly, in a room, in a conversation, in a lesson passed down. Nobody's filming that. But that's the thing that turned a park jam into a movement. The Bronx in the 70s was a place actively being told it didn't matter and was being written off by the city. In a place like that, knowledge isn't a luxury, it's armor. It's the thing that tells somebody growing up in the rubble that they do come from something, that they're not what they say they are. That there's a history and a philosophy underneath the chaos that they can actually stand on. Anyone who has studied the culture the way I have will tell you knowledge is the element sitting underneath all of them. The knowledge underneath to why 1520 Cedric Ave is referred to as the first party is simple. This is where all the elements came together under one roof. Cool DJ Herc, who is a graffiti artist, specifically played breaks for his b-boy friends. He even went out of his way to create a technique that just focused on playing the break called the merry-go-round. Then after that, he invited his other friend, Coke LaRock, to get on the mic. Herc was the first graffiti artist who DJ'd for b-boys by playing breaks with an MC on the mic, period. Cindy built the room, Herc made it a moment. Among the people who kept showing up to these parties was someone the street already knew for a different reason. He was there at the Boys Club back in December of '71, the same room where dozens of gang leaders sat across from each other and agreed to a truce. He was the leader of the Black Spades, one of the largest, most feared gangs in the Bronx. Now, a few years later, he's standing in the same room as Herc and watching kids settle their differences with dance moves instead of a blade. That gang leader saw something in that, not just a party, but a working alternative. If the truce has proven that violence could be paused, what he was watching here proved something further, that it could be replaced. So he used that idea and built a whole new structure around it. Then he brought his people into it. The Black Spades didn't fade away, they converted. The gang leader took what he had, an organization, a hierarchy, hundreds of members already loyal to him, and pointed them in a completely different direction. What became known as the Zulu Nation wasn't a new gang with a new name. It was an old gang given a new purpose, held together by a code of conduct, real rules, real expectations, all laid out for anyone willing to live by them. What the Zulu Nation actually asked of its members went a lot deeper than just showing up to a party unarmed. Publicly, the whole thing got summed up in a phrase, repeated so often it became something close to a motto: peace, love, unity, and safely having fun. Simple enough to say out loud, but underneath those words sat a much longer list of what a member was supposed to actually strive toward. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding, freedom, justice, equality, respect. Not vague ideas hanging in the air, but things a young person coming out of gang life was now being asked to actually build their life around, day to day, in the same way territory and loyalty had once organized their life around violence. The first thing that was changed was what people called themselves. No more soldiers, no more warlords. Now you could be a king, you could be a queen. It sounds simple, but it wasn't decoration. A title like that is a door. It tells you who you're allowed to become if you walk through it. You weren't born a king, you choose it. The same way you once chosen or maybe forced into a gang. Underneath that structure, something practical started happening. Kids who might have been fighting each other a few years earlier were now forming breaking crews and DJ crews instead, competing for status through skill instead of violence. The organization gave that shift somewhere to live, an actual home base, real gatherings, real expectations, instead of leaving it up to chance whether the good instinct held or old habits pulled people back. That's the part that matters most here. More than any party, more than any turntable. Nobody is born hip-hop. You have to choose it. You have to look at everything you were, everything the streets had decided you be, and say, nah, not this, something else. That choice multiplied across hundreds of young people who spent years ready to die over territory. That's what actually turned a truce into a culture. The elements gave it a form. This is what gave it a spine. The Zulu Nation wasn't alone in that instinct either. Only blocks away and in pockets all over the city, another movement had been teaching a version of the same idea for almost a decade already. One built less around music and more around knowledge, but built on the same exact foundation. You are not what you were told you are. You get to name yourself, you get to choose. This movement started back in 1964 in Harlem. A man by the name of Clarence 13X broke away from an existing religious organization and built something new. Something meant to reach young black men directly, on their own terms, in language that didn't require a temple or a title to access. He didn't call it a religion. He called it a way of understanding your own value, your own mind, your own place in the world. Teachings people came to know as the 5%, or the nations of gods and earth. In 1969, he was killed, assassinated, with the case still never solved. Here's the part that's almost hard to believe. Afterwards, no one stepped into his role, but his teachings continued. They kept moving, passed from young man to young man, corner to corner, without a headquarters and without a hierarchy handing down instructions. It survived on belief alone. Members took on new names built around a system of supreme mathematics and supreme alphabet, a framework for understanding self and knowledge, a practice of naming yourself into a new understanding of who you are. Nobody set out to build a rap movement out of this. That's not what it was for. But because it was already living inside the same men growing up in the same neighborhoods that were producing DJs, breakers, and MCs, it was only a matter of time before it surfaced directly inside the culture itself. From the world-famous Supreme Team to Rakim to Big Daddy Kane to Wu-Tang Clan and the many others influenced by the system of knowledge. What started on a street corner in Harlem in 1964 carried forward after 1969 by everyone who believed in it and ended up shaping some of the most important voices hip-hop would ever produce. By the time of the truce, the Zulu Nation and the earliest hip-hop parties were happening in the Bronx. This way of thinking had already been circulating through the same streets for the better part of a decade. Same neighborhoods, same young men that were pulled towards the gang life in the first place. At the center of it was the same instinct to reject the name and identity the world handed you and claim one that reflects who you actually understand yourself to be. So here we are. It's the mid-70s and hip-hop has set its moral compass in place. A code of conduct and expectation of behaviors and a lifestyle choice to express oneself through art and pursue peace and knowledge, not violence. Then in the summer of '77, New York was a city on its knees. It was nearly bankrupt, coming off of years of financial collapse that had already forced layoffs of police officers and firefighters and gutted basic city services. Unemployment was in double digits. Crime had been climbing for a decade straight. Robberies alone up tenfold. That same summer, the entire city was gripped by a fear of a serial killer the papers were calling Son of Sam, still on the loose, still unidentified, with people afraid to even be out on the street at night. On top of all that, a brutal heat wave has settled over the city, temperatures pushing past 100 degrees day after day. The city wasn't struggling, it was standing right at the edge. Then on the night of July 13th, lightning struck a power line north of the city. Within an hour, the failure cascaded through the entire grid, and just before 10 o'clock at night, New York City went completely dark. Subway trains stopped mid-tunnel, frozen on the tracks. In a city already strained, already desperate, the darkness didn't stay quiet for long. What followed became one of the largest single nights of looting in American history. Over the next 25 hours, more than 1,600 stores were broken into across the city. Over 1,000 fires were set. Thousands of people were arrested, the largest mass arrest New York has ever seen. It wasn't organized, it wasn't planned, it was chaos pure and simple, born out of a city that has been pushed right up against its own limits. In the middle of all that chaos, in neighborhoods across the Bronx, something else was happening that nobody could have predicted and nobody could have planned. Electronic stores went first and went hard. Turntables, mixers, speakers, amplifiers, all of it disappeared into the dark that night, into the hands of teenagers who spent the last few years watching Herc and every other DJ crew building their reputation block by block and wanting in themselves. without ever having the money to actually get the equipment that would let them. DJs who go on to shape the culture have been open about exactly where their gear came from that night. Grandmaster Caz has talked about walking straight into the store he already knew and coming out with a mixer. DJ Clark Kent has also said the same thing about his very first turntable. One person who lived through it summed up what happened next in the simplest possible terms. Before that night, you can count the known DJ crews in the Bronx on 2 hands. After that, there was a DJ on every block. But a DJ on every block creates a different problem. When everybody suddenly has the equipment, having the equipment stops being what separates you. Somebody still has to be the one who's actually better. Somebody still has to take 2 turntables and figure out what nobody else in the Bronx had figured out yet. How to really control a record. How to make the break go on forever. How to turn scratching a needle into an instrument on its own. That somebody was already out there, quietly working exactly on that problem in the same neighborhoods during these same years. And what he built next didn't just add another DJ to the block. It changed the way DJing actually was.